Welcome back, game theorists. Today we're going to learn more about sequential games. We saw how to draw them with a game tree earlier. We also saw how to solve them with rollback. We also learned how to deal with external uncertainty. So now I'll look at some applications and extensions. So one thing to look at is something called time inconsistent preferences. So what I mean by that is you might start with some plan you have in mind, but your future self has different preferences and does not carry out the plan. So the way you model these kinds of situations is as a game between multiple versions of yourself. There is today's self making the plan, and there's tomorrow's self, which might or might not follow it. So there are many examples, some of which you're actually quite familiar with. So today's self says, we're going to stay on top of our homework. I'm going to start my homework 4 days early, so that way if I have any questions, I'll have time to ask them, and I'll have plenty of time to work through some of the harder problems, and I'll get this done on time, and I'll be responsible. Well, future self, before starting homework, discovers some really interesting cat videos on the internet and decides, I'll do the homework tomorrow instead. And then tomorrow, future self has some others to do as well and finds some other distractions. And then next thing you know, it's 5 minutes before the deadline and you're still struggling to type out your final answers and things did not go as planned. That's one example out of many of time inconsistent preferences. So procrastination is a general case of time inconsistent preferences. There's also an example way back from Greek mythology. So this is from Ulysses or Odysseus, depending on which version you're reading. Make sure I get that spelling right. All right. So, in the myth, Ulysses went and fought in a long war with Troy, as detailed in the book The Iliad. And then there's another big book documenting his trip back home. It was not quite so straightforward. There are lots of adventures along the way. So at one point, he has to pass by this island of the Sirens. And the myths differ a little bit in some of the details, but they all agree on some of the basics. So in the myth, the Sirens play this beautiful, beautiful music. Anyone who hears it cannot resist the temptation to go to the island. The problem is that once you go to the island, the Sirens kill you. So it'd be really nice if you could enjoy the music as you pass by, but then not get sucked in to the island and not get killed. So Ulysses' current self wanted to hear the music but then keep on sailing. But he knew that future self would not obey that plan. So the music could be heard from far away, so you could hear it while you're passing by. You don't have to go to the island, but you'll find a temptation too strong if you do hear it. So how did Ulysses resolve this dilemma? Well, if you read the myth, well, first let's set up the game theory, the game tree for the situation. And then we'll talk about how Ulysses dealt with this situation. So like I said, we model this as a game between multiple cells. We have current Ulysses up here first, making the plans. So current Ulysses can either listen to the music as they pass by, or he could wear some earplugs and not listen. So if he doesn't listen, then the game ends and I just keep sailing by the island, and that's it. If he does listen, though, then future Ulysses has to decide, I'll just call him future U because I'm running low on space, has to decide to go to the island or stay at sea. And just keep going by. And there are payoffs. We'll list the payoffs with current Ulysses on top. So if they don't listen, then let's just call it 0-0. Now, if current Ulysses can listen to the music and not get killed, we'll call it payoff of positive 50. But future Ulysses, having heard the music, is sad to keep on sailing and not be able to hear it anymore and gets a payoff of minus 10. If we go to the island, though, and get killed, that doesn't sound like fun, to put it mildly. We'll call it minus 1,000 for getting killed. But future Ulysses has been swept away by the music and is willing to go to the island anyways and get a payoff of positive 20. That's how I'll model the game. So let's practice our rollback skills. Go ahead and pause the video here and find the rollback equilibrium to this game. All right, I'll assume you've taken a stab at it. So we go to the end of the game and then work our way backwards. This is the last part of the game where future Ulysses has to decide between going to the island or staying at sea. Future Ulysses has payoffs on the bottom, so he looks at these numbers. And he finds that going to the island gives a higher payoff than staying at sea. His preferences have changed to the point where he wants to hear the music at all costs, even if those costs are his life. So he would pick going to the island. Current Ulysses aware of this, realizes that if he listens, we're going to go to the island and get a payoff of minus 1,000, because current Ulysses cares about these top numbers. So it's better to not listen and get 0. So in the Greek myth, Ulysses put on earplugs and did not listen to the music and went on to have other adventures. Okay, that's not quite what happened. The story went a little bit differently, but in a way that is very instructive for us. Ulysses had a different idea. He did want to listen to the music, but did not want to get killed. So current Ulysses had to somehow set up a plan and also have a way to make sure that future Ulysses can't override it. So here's what he did. So he had his sailors tie him to the mast, and Ulysses had no earplugs, but all his sailors had earplugs. Oops. Sailors, not tailors. They're different. And importantly, he also said, no matter what I do, keep me tied up until we pass by that island. And don't take your earplugs under any circumstances until we pass by that island. So that way the sailors could not be tempted to listen to the music and get sucked in. And also, future Ulysses would be powerless to direct them to go to the island. So future Ulysses could not override the plan set by current Ulysses to both listen to the music and survive. Couldn't change that. So economics actually has a term for what's going on here. We say current Ulysses was using what's called a commitment device. So he set up a plan, but also set up a way to ensure that he follows through on that plan. So that's effectively rewrote this game in a way that let current Ulysses have his way and get this outcome. Hear the music, but not get killed. So why I said it's relevant is not just some Greek myth, as extensions beyond that, the idea of using commitment devices has gone into other applications as well. So for example, I was reading about this program called Save More Tomorrow. So maybe current you has a plan that I'm going to save diligently for retirement. I'm going to save a fairly large chunk of my income so that when I retire, I'm going to have enough to survive and live a decent standard of living. However, future you, once you get your paycheck, might just be tempted to spend it all. So kind of like a new version of Ulysses where you got this plan to save diligently, but you can't follow through because of your temptations and your future self's different preferences. So the way the Save More Tomorrow program works is that workers can commit in advance to automatically save some part of their future raises. So that way, if I've committed this program, I've locked myself in, I'm going to save maybe 30% of my next raise, then that's going to not let your future self spend it all. It's kind of a way of tying yourself to the mast and forcing yourself to save through this program. So whenever you have this time inconsistent preferences issue, you also got to be aware that some kind of commitment device can change the game and be alert to those. Here's another illustration. We call this one the drug game. So current self can either do drugs or not. So maybe you'd like to get the benefits of drugs just once, but you know if you get addicted, that can really destroy your body and do lots and lots of awful things. So you want to do it just once, get some benefits, but without destroying your body. The problem, as you probably are aware, is that future self, once you've had drugs, is probably going to get addicted. And you go down that road of destroying your health and dying at a young age. Not very desirable. So let's write down some payoffs. We'll put current self on top. As you say, if zero's going to be what happens if you don't do anything, because nothing changes there. And if you do drugs just once, current self likes that, gets a payoff of +1. Future self, though, is hooked and does not want to stop. It's a payoff of -1. If you continue, though, future self is happy about that because future self is now hooked, but current self does not want to go down that road and destroy their body. So there's your setup. If you want to get some more practice, go ahead and pause the video here and try to find the rollback equilibrium. All right, I'll assume you're taking some time to work that out. Let's solve it. So future self is down here at this last node. Their payoff's on the bottom, so they look at the bottom numbers. Future self is going to want to continue, so that gets an arrow. Current self knows that if they start doing drugs, they can't stop. And that'll land us current self at -1, so it's better to get 0 and not do drugs in the first place. So there's the game theoretic argument for not doing drugs. Rollback equilibrium means you should do no drugs. I can't really think of a reliable commitment device along the lines of what Ulysses did with drugs. People who really, really, really want drugs seem to find a way to get them. All right, moving on. So, with sequential games, the players take turns. That's what a sequential game means. Now, to be clear, having the first turn of a sequential game is not always an advantage. So you can see why in some cases it could be an advantage. I get to talk about chess again. So in chess, having the first move gives you a slight advantage, maybe like, with chess it's not like 50-50 chances, more like 54-46 in my database. So I'm talking about chess, so let's move on to some other topics. It can also be an advantage in some business environments. So some examples. So Apple came out with the iPod years ago, and then Microsoft tried to copy it with something called Zune. And we all know who won that one. Some of you guys might not even heard of Zune. So because iPod was there first, they got established and they got market share. And then once people were relying upon that, they are reluctant to switch to something else. It's easier to stick with what you know. And in other cases, you had with search engines, Google's become a verb. Just Google it. It's a common phrase. Microsoft tried imitating that with Bing and didn't really catch on the same way. Now, of course, there are cases where Microsoft has been successful in being the second player, and they're of course doing very well economically, but more often than not, in business, it can be better to be the first one in a market. Now, why can having the first move be a bad thing sometimes? Well, that's because the player who moves first is going to lose some flexibility. You got to commit yourself on the first move, whereas the second player can observe that, get more information, and then have this extra flexibility. So for example, if you're playing rock, paper, scissors sequentially, moving first is very much not an advantage. So by sequentially, I mean you take turns. So that means player one says rock, paper, or scissors, and maybe you pick scissors. Player two, knowing this, will pick rock and beat you, because player one had to reveal their move on their first turn. Second player has extra flexibility and information, and they can exploit that to win every time. So you play sequential rock, paper, scissors, player two is going to win 100% of the games. So in some cases, in some contexts, that extra information and flexibility can be the more important consideration. So as you can see, there's some context dependency here. Sometimes moving first is better because you can establish yourself first, like in business. A lot of times, information and flexibility carry more weight. So those are some things to think about with sequential games. I believe we have sequential going to play in class, so I'll announce that on Blackboard, and we'll talk about those results. So that's all for Chapter 3. Stay safe out there and take care.